All right, everyone. Welcome to Module 4. We're going to talk about corrective feedback. I have a little cartoon here. Uh, I, Tarzan, you, Jane, with the correction of, I'm Tarzan, you're Jane. And, just talking about what is, when do we need to provide feedback for our students? How do we provide it? Um, and just, we're going to really dive into that. All right, so some things that we're going to cover. We're going to talk about the role and the importance of corrective feedback in speaking. I want us to recognize 5 of the corrective feedback techniques, so we'll go over those. We're going to practice providing speaking and writing feedback towards the end, and then your cultural profile will be Iraq for this week. So the first handful of slides we're going to be about really that technique, and then at the end we'll talk about speaking and writing. So questions that are frequently asked is, should we be providing this feedback for our learners as they are learning the language, or should they be finding this out on their own? We're gonna look at that. When should learners errors be corrected? So when during the time when they make the error, are you correcting them? Are you doing it right then, or do you follow up with it later? Which errors do we correct? And then finally, how should we be correcting them? So going back to the theorists, we have naturalists, behaviorists. Naturalists, it's all about there being no need for correction at all. About that natural, just about the speaker naturally coming into language and finding out errors on their own. Behaviorists are on the other end of the spectrum. So the behaviorists feel that there's an absolute need to have that error correction, and that it's all about the mechanics of things. So majority of teachers and researchers and students believe that feedback is necessary, that you need to have that as part of the process. So I think it's kind of a little bit of both, really. I think that it is absolutely important to teach the fundamentals, to give feedback, but there's also a natural progression that's going to lead to fluency. All right, so key terms we're going to talk about, we have explicit correction, which is kind of a direct, and then implicit, which is indirect. These are the two main types of corrective feedback, or at least the way that we approach them. And the idea is eventually that leads to self-correction, which is what we want our kiddos to be doing, or adults or language learners to be doing, is that we want them to be correcting on their own, and that's what gets them towards fluency. All right, so we have an example sentence here that we're going to be using when we look at our 5 techniques. So I visit my aunt yesterday. So how would we approach that in the classroom? If we're looking at it through the lens of explicit correction, we would be talking about, we would be looking at that input in very quickly coming in and saying, we'd inform the speaker that that's not the way you say it. No, that it's not visit my aunt yesterday, it's visited. Okay. And the key part of explicit correction is that you are providing the corrected form. Okay, so this would be, right after the student has said the sentence incorrect, just quickly coming in and saying, that's not the way you do it, this is the way you do it. Clarification request, this would be, that a little bit more subtle. I'm sorry, what did you say? Indicate a misunderstanding that would hopefully lead the speaker to see the error on their own and make that self-correction. Oh, I'm sorry, I visited my aunt yesterday. We have repetition, which is kind of it's saying it back to the speaker in a way that would give the impression that maybe there's a misunderstanding. So, I visit my aunt yesterday. and the hope is that the speaker is going to go, oh no, sorry, visited my aunt yesterday. So saying it back incorrectly to get the speaker to hear the correct way. Okay. We have recasts, which is that we rephrase the utterance to eliminate errors and use it in its correct form. Okay, so an example, an explicit example would be, "Oh, you visited your aunt yesterday." So providing the correct term, but by rephrasing it back. And then there's also the implicit, which would be the subtle way of doing it, which would be like, "I visited my aunt last week." So giving an example, basically retelling the sentence back to the speaker in a way that lets them see the error without you essentially calling them out on it. Okay, we have metalinguistic feedback. So the whole point is that you're not providing the correct form. The teacher would propose a question or information, so usually a yes or no. So there's some examples of this would be, is it visit yesterday? And that would get the speaker to say, no, it would be visited, or to say, I don't think we visit yesterday. So you're trying to get the speaker to think about the input, and this is getting them kind of geared into that idea of self-correction, and getting them towards that. Elicitation. Okay, so in elicitation, the teacher directly elicits the correct form from the student by asking questions or by pausing or asking a student to reformulate the question. So here's an example of that. It would be like, so yesterday you visit, or try that again. How do we say that in the past tense? Yesterday we visited, or do we say visit yesterday or visited yesterday? So we're trying to pull that correct form by asking questions. Okay, so this is just kind of taking a step back and looking at everything. So we can see examples. I think this is good. We typically focus on one or two when we're looking at corrective feedback, what we kind of fall into. So this is kind of a good way to really look at it and kind of determine where you fall into this and how you feel about each one. All right, so the most effective types of feedback, with metalinguistic, and elicitation, they're all about getting them to think about it. Okay, we're trying to encourage that self-correction process to start rolling. Typically, the most as well as clarification and repetition, but you can kind of see an order of self-correction, go downward. So metalinguistic would be kind of on the high end of that, really getting that thinking process going, and then down to repetition, where the speaker is going to be hearing the correct version and then being able to move from there. So, and it's all about encouraging that cognition. But these are definitely are the most effective. Okay, the most common type of corrective feedback, for better or for worse, is recast. It's the least effective for children, and a lot of that has to do with we want to promote a feeling of competence, and we want them to feel sure in what they're doing, and sometimes recast can really affect that. I like to think of recast in terms of spell check. Does spell check really teach you to become better at spelling? I don't think so. In fact, I think I'm worse at spelling for spell check. Another thing would be GPS. You're following the route, but you're not really thinking about what's going on. All right, some feedback strategies. You want to make sure you use a variety of feedback. As I said, we tend to typically kind of fall into one or two, but use that chart. It's important to kind of figure out, especially depending on your student's ability level and what feedback they're needing. Using different types of feedback can help out with that. You want to make sure you're consistent in how you provide feedback. You want to make sure that you're not interfering with the learning process. Too much feedback can kind of confuse what the point of the learning process is. You want to limit your corrective feedback for young learners, just because, as I said, we're trying to build that confidence in speaking. And if the student feels like they're going to be corrected constantly, they will get the language in. And it's important to make sure that we are providing that corrective feedback, but we want to make sure that they also feel comfortable in making mistakes as well, and allowing them to kind of mature in the language. Make sure that we give time for students to self-correct. A lot of times if a student, is speaking and they make an error, they'll hear it on their own. We don't want to just jump on them. Make sure to use your voice, okay? And really show that it's all about corrective feedback. So make sure that we're using our voice to show how it should be. We want to try, especially with the younger kiddos, it's a little bit tougher because we just, as a classroom teacher, there's also that need to just keep the class moving. So, but it's important to not just give them the answer. Once again, we're trying to get that cognition and that self-correction to start working on its own. As well as we don't want to offer lengthy explanations. Sometimes it's tough because we know more as teachers, and we want to offer more information that's really needed. It's all about providing that feedback for the error and moving on past that. Okay, so who should make corrections? So we'll call these our corrective agents. So your goal is for them to make their own corrections. We want those corrections to come from the learner. Another corrective agent would be peer corrections. Okay, so classmates, peers, making those corrections. But the important thing is we need to make sure that it needs to be monitored to a degree, because we want the corrections to be correct, essentially. And it can form bad habits if peer corrections are not yielding correct results. Last but not least, we have the teacher corrections. Okay. All right. Responses to corrective feedback questions. Should learner errors be corrected? Yes, absolutely. We talked about fossilization in the last chapter of reading, and when things become fossilized, it's hard to break those habits. So we want to make sure we get them corrected before they become fossilized. When should we do this? We want to make sure it doesn't interfere with conversation. One of the things that I think about when I think about this would be, if a student's trying to, say a student reads a passage, and your goal as an educator is to find out how much that student comprehends of the passage. If the student is speaking about the passage to you and we're making corrections on their speaking, that's going to it's going to get in the way of what the goal is. The goal is for the student to be able to talk to you about what they read. And so we just want to make sure it doesn't interfere with conversation, because a lot of, while, those mechanics and the grammar and everything is absolutely important, we also want, the fluidity of conversation is something that students also need to practice, and we want to make sure we're not hindering that. If they're repeating the same error, we absolutely want to make sure that we get at it, because once again, we don't want it to become fossilized. So which errors should we be correcting? Really, with our younger students, it's about meaning. With our older learners, adults, it's more about form and grammar. All right, written feedback. ELLs love written feedback, and this is important for a couple different reasons. One, if we are speaking to them and maybe we're providing a lot of feedback over a written piece, it's not uncommon for students to kind of just get lost in it, or maybe it just kind of it'll go over our head. Written feedback is nice because it allows the student to be able to not only get good feedback from you, but also they're working on those reading skills and comprehension skills, which is important. So, anytime you can double up on things, that's what we want to do. So written feedback is great. Reply and response journals are a great way to do it. In the digital age, that could be that could be a Google form or a Google Doc with comments on it. Stickers, something as simple as stickers can be a big thing for learners. That depending on where your students are from, and maybe their situation, that just something as small as a sticker can mean a lot to younger kids. Everybody loves stickers. Use a key. If you're especially if you're big into proofreading, and you're all about the symbols, or if you have if there's an issue with like a verb and you have a V, make sure that you have a key that the students can use so that they know what is being corrected. All right, so this is our discussion post for the week. I hope that you found this PowerPoint to be interesting and that you learned something on it. I think that corrective feedback is one of those things for me personally. When working with ESL students, I found that it was really uncomfortable at first because you feel like you're constantly, making corrections and things, even if you're trying not to. But it is important, and once again, we want to really avoid that fossilization, especially with their younger learners, because they're taking in everything so fast. So please make sure to fill out your discussion post. If you are not a teacher in a classroom, and you do not use corrective feedback right now, talk about which one, which out of these, which do you feel is the most natural to you? Okay, so hope everybody has a great week and take care.